Assalamu alaikum and good day everyone. Today we move to the 20th century. We'll speak about major issues in the 20th century, major names and major literary texts. We are about to close this course, and I want you always to imagine how the journey of English literature moved from the oral Old English tradition and then to Middle English and then to drama, Shakespeare and poetry and novel and the prose and then the 20th century. This has been a fascinating journey. It's not easy again to speak about everything in English literature in just 30 or 40 classes. In the future, hopefully you will be studying more literature courses and you will go in depth into more issues than we discussed here. My aim was to give you an idea, to show you how literature and life interact, how life influences literature, and how literature also creates particular things in life in the sense that it empowers people, it suggests new ideas, it makes us grow in a way or another, and how literature has always been used by the marginalized, by the subclass, by women, by the outsiders as a tool of resistance, of speaking truth to power, of expressing themselves, in the sense that literature is revolution and can cause revolutions. Now, the 20th century is a fascinating era to speak about in all issues, whether we speak about technology, advanced technological advancements, industry, society, philosophy, literature, arts, relationships, how the world has become a really tiny village, especially with the internet in the late 20th century. Now, when we speak about, before we speak about the literature, I want just to mention the major issues here. I can't cover everything again, but we'll have an idea. So remember how people were lamenting the loss of faith in the late Victorian age. They were sad, expressing their sadness because people were no longer the people who used to be close, who loved each other, who were, in a way or another, living in a society in harmony, and how this society, because of the city and the Industrial Revolution, how everything was changing and moving to the worst. Some people lamented this in literature, especially in the poetry of the late Victorian period, and we've seen the crisis of faith in Matthew Arnold's famous poem Dover Beach. And now, when Arnold gave us a little tiny ray of hope when he said, "Let us be true to one another," suggesting that be honesty and truth and beauty are all important things that can at least unite us despite the differences. Now, when people had a little tiny hope, the Great War or the First World War broke out. And millions of people were killed. I'm not sure how many, but I think like over 20 million people were killed. And most of them were white European Christians. So there was, I remember in the literature, we have always this idea of the Western man being more superior than the native Africans or Asians, being smarter, more civilized. And now all of a sudden, the Europeans among themselves, the Christians, the white people, are massacring each other for more or less trivial things. Could be political issues, but sometimes you go back to the origin of how it all started, and it's a stupid thing. And this was the final blow that people lost hope. So many people lost hope. So the period between the First World War and the Second World War, especially in the 30s, is called the lost generation, when people lost not only hope, but everything. Even the tiny little spark of hope they had of maybe this is the Western civilization. It's going to be the best history has ever known. But then all of a sudden, one war and another war, and tens of millions of people, over 50, around 60 million people were massacred because in a way or another, there's no hope. Humanity is doomed to fail. Remember the positivism of George Eliot, that humanity is advancing, progressing, the good is yet to come. This proved that many things were not true. Now, the British Empire started to fall apart, to be torn into pieces because of the liberation movements and the resistance by the colonized around the world. So England was shrinking. The British Empire itself was shrinking until it's now only a little tiny island and some symbolic authority here and there. In the 20th century, we speak about the rise of fascism, the rise of Nazism, like as too brutal, like the worst of what humanity has given, especially in modern history, is fascism and Nazism, when people considered themselves to be better just because of the color of their skin, to be more superior, and to give themselves the right to kill, massacre millions of people just because they believe that we are the chosen people more or less. Fascism or Nazism could have ended with the fall or the defeat of Hitler and Germany, but neo-Nazism and Nazis are still alive and kicking around the world. And fascists are also still alive and kicking around the world. There are still many people who believe that, for example, the white people are the best, the most superior, and this is called white supremacy. So no matter what people do, like sometimes they say, why are people like this? Why is it that this person hates me because of what I believe, what I wear, or what I think, or how I look? Horrible people will always be around, no matter what we do, no matter how good we are. Okay? So when we speak about literature, because this is a literature course, we speak about modernism. And when I spoke about John Donne and the metaphysical poets, and I said these were, in a way or another, modernist poets. When I spoke about, what's his name, Lawrence Sterne, I said his text, Tristram Shandy, is also a modernist text. And when we spoke about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, we said there are modernist elements. Some people think that modernism started in the 20th century. It's not accurate. Modernism is not related to a particular time. But the majority of modernist artistic creation took place in the 20th century. So I always give this funny example of, I say if modernism is a pizza, at least 2 slices of it happened before the 20th century. Examples, John Donne, Herbert, Lawrence Sterne, Mary Shelley have generally experimental issues. When we speak about modernism, it's basically how you try to bring new forms of expression, new literary forms, how you try to break the rules and the barriers of what you have to do, and you just do something new. That's basically what it is. When we speak also about literature, we speak about literary theory. So we have literature in the past 2,000 years ago or more. We speak about Aristotle and Plato. You know, Plato, Platon, Aristotle. Those people spoke about literature, and they tried to give an idea to help us understand literature. So it was basically, if you follow these particular rules, you're going to write great literature. And great literature is great because of 1, 2, 3, 4. And it helps us to appreciate and understand a poem. So you look at the poem, you look at the criteria they said, and say, oh, this is a great text because 1, 2, 3. And we spoke about Shelley, who wrote an essay on criticism. And also, what's his name? Alexander Pope also wrote another essay on criticism and literary criticism. So what is literary theory? I don't want you to be bothered a lot here, but just to have an idea. Basically, literary criticism or literary theories, they are a set of theories to help us, to guide us how to understand literature. I'll speak about 2 examples here. Feminism, we mentioned feminism before. Feminism is the movement, the literary theory that looks at texts from the perspective of a woman, how women are treated. It's basically a movement that says women are equal to men or are different in their own way, not worse. Some people say they are better than men. Okay? Like it depends on how you take it. So feminism goes to the literary text and tries to see, okay, why are you depicting the woman in this way? Why are you representing this woman in this way? Why do most women die in the literary text? This is anti-feminism. Why aren't you allowing the woman to express herself? This is anti-feminism. And women should have their own rights to speak, to express themselves, to love, to hate, to do, to act. This was a significant thing that empowered women. The other thing is post-colonialism. And I'll just go through it in a bit. And also post-colonialism, we spoke about it when we mentioned who's the founder, more or less, of post-colonialism. We mentioned before. What's his name? Palestinian. Edward Said. Edward Said is said to be, although he's quoted by some people that say like, no, I didn't invent post-colonialism. But it is generally attributed to Edward Said, post-colonialism. Now, post-colonialism says, okay, it focuses mainly on the relationship between the East and the West, the imperial powers of Europe and the colonized, oppressed people in Asia and Africa and around the world. So both of these theories invite us to question, to challenge, to reread the canon. So remember the canon. What is the canon? The set of the most important writings, literary works, whether poetry, novel, or drama. When we check this again, thanks to these theories, they said, okay, wait a minute. Why are all the writers men? White, Europeans, Christians. No women, basically. No people of color. There's something wrong with this. So we reread the canon in a way or another. So today I'll speak about Edward Said, Virginia Woolf. Edward Said as post-colonialism figure. Virginia Woolf as a feminist figure, critic. I'll give you examples from three major literary texts, I guess. We'll have T.S. Eliot as a poet, James Joyce as a novelist, and Samuel Beckett as a playwright or a dramatist, just to show you an idea about the 20th century, mainly in brief. So this is T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot is said to be the greatest 20th century poet and critic. His famous poem is The Wasteland, and it's generally translated into Arabic as الخراب الأرض اليباب الأرض الخراب. Okay, so notice it's two words here, not one word. So the wasteland. So the Wasteland, written around 1922 by T.S. Eliot, is considered to be the most important poem in the 20th century. It is one of the most really fascinating poems of all time. And when you read it, it's very interesting. Again, when I tell you try to read it, I understand you're still, taking the first steps into English literature and English language. But give it a shot. At least listen to poetry. The most significant thing about poetry is still listen to it, because poetry is meant to be recited. Listen to the recitation on YouTube. So this poem, T.S. Eliot begins, the title, The Wasteland, is taken from the Bible. So it's not his. And then he uses a myth, an ancient myth about a woman named Cybele. This woman, an ancient mythology like the stories from 2,000, 3,000 years ago with the gods and goddesses, like unbelievable fictional stories, similar to Beowulf in a way. So Cybele was asked by someone, you have one wish. What do you want to wish? And anything you wish, you will be granted. Interesting, right? So what would you ask for? What would you ask for now here?
To read people's minds.
Whoa, wow. That's spooky. To?
Go
back in time. Back, not forward. Back in time. What else? What else would you do? If you get a full mark? Come on, that's very simplistic. But yeah, depends. What did she ask for? She asked for eternal life. She wanted to live. Very ambitious. Everyone wants to live forever. However, and this is where the famous saying comes from. In English, they say, "Careful what you wish for." So, sir, we want the final exam to be all true or false. And I tell you, careful what you wish for, because it could be tough. Okay? I tell you, it's better for you if you write paragraphs, because you train to write and express yourself. But true or false, it's like true or false. Okay? Black and white, right? she forgot. She should have asked for eternal health or eternal youth. Happiness, but means death eventually. So she asked for eternal life, and she was given eternal life. And what happens here is that she grew very old and very tiny. She kept shrinking and shrinking and shrinking to the extent that she became like a tiny little creature, like a little bird. And people put her in a cage. And like after hundreds of years later, the kids would be teasing her and making fun of her. Hey, Sibel, what do you want? So I remember at the beginning she said, I want eternal life. Now she's saying, I want to die. She wants to die, and she can't even die. And this is, for T.S. Eliot, this is something in the 20th century. People wanted to die, but they couldn't even die. Even death was a difficult. So he goes from the Bible to Greek and Latin language. He doesn't write in English this. And then he dedicates this poem to his friend, the famous poet and critic, Ezra Pound. Also, he uses Italian. So, Bible, Latin and Greek, Italian, and there is a subheading for this section of the poem called The Burial of the Dead, and I think it's also taken from the Bible. So what is he writing? There's nothing by T.S. Eliot. And finally, when we read April is the cruelest month, we say, finally, we come to the poem. And if you're smart enough, I think you are, you will remember that. Yeah, thank you. When we discussed Chaucer, Canterbury Tales, he started this by opening the poem praising April. What does April generally symbolize? Life, spring, rebirth, resurrection, new beginning, new world, new experiences, new ambitions, life, beauty, happiness. And this has been the case in English literature. So spring always represents new life, rebirth. But here, what is spring bringing to England, to the West, to Europe? Death and destruction. Millions of people dying in the First World War. So it's like, in my understanding, T.S. Eliot this is called allusion. You know allusion, when you allude to a text outside your own text. Okay? So he's, as if he's going back in history. Remember we said Chaucer is the father of English poetry? So it's like he's going to Chaucer, dragging him by the hand, dragging him by the hand, dragging him by the hand, maybe by the collar, bringing him to the 20th century and telling us all, it's all been a lie. It's a lie. Don't believe this. We are all going to die. And even when we want to die, we can't. Because April is not a beautiful month. April is a cruelest month. Breeding lilacs out of the dead. Because when, the flowers and the trees and the plants spring beneath this, millions of dead bodies. And land and mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, at least like you don't go out in winter. You just try to forget. Covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers. Summer surprised us. Now in this text, he uses so many languages. Like after some 10 lines, he uses, for example, Latin, Greek, Italian, German language, French language. He uses Egyptian mythologies. He uses Chinese mythologies, ancient mythologies. Like when people first read this poem, like, what's going on here? We don't understand basically everything. So later on, he published something and he added notes. He says, okay, here I mean this, and here I mean that, and here I mean this and that. But all just we need here for the class is this, like April is the cruelest month, and how literature in the 20th century became more self-aware about itself. There is a lot of metafictional elements here, like always taking you outside of the text. If you look at the structure here, you'll see that it's not like the classical poetry. This is experimental. This is modernist poetry. This is poetry that doesn't follow the rules of decorum. And no surprise, it was T.S. Eliot who praised John Donne and showed how important he is. In a way, he learned something from John Donne, like many other poets of the 20th century. Look at even the rhyme scheme. Breeding, mixing, stirring, grain, right? It's almost the same in a way or another. Does this make it less poetic than any other poetry? This is the greatest poem of the 20th century. But I'm sure Samuel Johnson and Pope and Dryden would be pulling their hair right now. Because for them, you have to follow the rules of decorum in a way or another. So this is basically what we need to know about the wasteland. April is the cruelest month. And then I'll give you an example from the novel. And listen, doesn't mean every single literary work in the 20th century is a modernist text. But the major trend, the most important famous trend, is modernist literature. Although many people were writing ordinary classical traditional poetry and stuff. So James Joyce, Ulysses. Remember Ulysses? I mentioned Ulysses, Homer, character from Homer, from the Odyssey. And it was mentioned by other poet, Tennyson, I guess. Anyway. So this text, Ulysses, refers to the ancient mythology about someone named Ulysses.
Is it considered an allusion?
Yeah, of course. There is usually this allusion and metafictional element. Sometimes even intertextuality if you use texts from the past. So in this novel, James Joyce uses the famous stream of consciousness technique of narrative. Remember Lawrence Stern? Yeah. So he was one of the first people to use this, where you get inside the mind, the thoughts of the character, and you expose them, reveal as they develop, as they come, how the ideas develop. But here he also mixes between first person and third person narrators. Very experimental poem. The text covers3 hours in the life of the author. And the novel, how long is it? Like 3 pages, 30 pages, 10 pages. If you go back home today and write your own diaries, you write everything that happened with you, and even every thought that you thought of or imagined.
Right.
Maybe you write 100 pages, 50 pages, 70 pages, 3 pages, depends on how imaginative you are. But 18 hours, almost 1,000 pages, that's a lot of pages. Why? Because of the stream of consciousness technique. This novel is considered, many people hated this poem, by the way, this novel. What are you doing? Why are you jumping from one? Sometimes you don't know who the narrator is. But in a way, this reflects something about the 20th century, the difficulties, the new experimentations, the new intellectualism, how people wanted to change, to break all sorts of barriers. Someone, not sure here in this class or another class, mentioned Kafka. Go read something about Kafka. Also amazing stuff. For example, in one of his novels, the main character wakes up and finds himself to be a beetle, I guess, or a small insect. Just he goes out to work, to the outside world as a small insect, a small animal. Beautiful stuff. But yeah, you have to have this idea about what modernism and postmodernism is. Okay? For one interesting fact about this novel is that the last 50 pages have no punctuation marks. Nothing. It's like 50 pages, no punctuation marks at all. Why would he do this? Yeah, why? Remember, if there is something, there is a reason. If it's there for a reason. If it's not there for a reason. That's basically literature. Yeah?
I think it's because to show that he is a good writer and he has a different type of style than other writers.
Okay. But it's not about only being a good writer. But yeah, he's being different. But why would you write a whole page sometimes, or 2 or 3 pages, without punctuation marks?
Maybe to reflect a case of chaos and...
Okay, interesting also. Reflect some chaos, some lawlessness. I'm not following the rules of grammar and punctuation. I'm not doing this. But there's something else. Yes? That's okay. This is his new way of writing.
To make the reader thinks that all of what actions happen in this page happened in one maybe situation.
Or it's like you have, they say no matter how big the dream is, it's only like seconds.
Yeah.
So this is just something that crosses your mind. No time for punctuation. Good. But remember, what is the style Narrative. That's narrative style. What is stream of consciousness again? Technique where we get inside the mind and we see the ideas and how they develop, how they go, how they move, how they become, how they come out. When you think, you don't think with punctuation marks, do you?
They are not organized.
When you hear maybe daydreaming, say, I want this class to finish, exclamation point. I wonder what my mom is cooking for us today, full stop. I hope she's not doing mulukhiyah again, exclamation mark. Please, mom, do something I love, exclamation mark. You don't do this. When we think, we don't pay attention to grammar, right? And so I go, okay, I want, oh, wait a minute. I thought using the past simple, I should be using the present perfect. We don't do this. So this is reflecting the stream of consciousness technique. Okay, unless you want to think using grammar, it's up to you. Another example from the 20th century, this time it's a play. Play. The name of the play is Waiting for Godot, and the T is silent. Waiting for silent T, not Godot, Godot. And it's half of God, right? It's like an extra syllable on God here, playing. But does it mean God? We don't know. Some people say yes, some people say no. Remember Shakespeare? And the plays consisted of basically 5 acts. Each act has scenes, sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9 more. And generally act number 3 has the climax and the top, the peak. And after that, things go down for the resolution. So the complication, the plot moves this way. So this is the plot for a traditional play. Shakespearean play, Greek, ancient drama, basically was like this. But let's see Samuel Beckett. Samuel Beckett, famous playwright, wonderful playwright. In Waiting for Godot, it's basically 2 acts. And basically the 2 acts mirror each other. What happens in the first one basically happens in the second one. The story of the play is that 2 people were just waiting for someone named Godot. Who's Godot? Nobody knows. Has anybody met him before? Nobody knows. Does he come? He doesn't come.
How did they know that?
They just don't. And that's why now it's a famous expression. What are you doing here? You could be waiting for the teacher, for the head of the department, waiting for something, for the electricity. What are you doing? Oh, I'm waiting for Godot. Like I'm waiting for something that is not going to come, generally. Okay? So one of the characters summarizes even the whole, in a way or another, the whole play saying, nothing happens, nobody comes, nobody goes. So the first act or scene, they're just waiting and spending their time chatting about trivial, stupid things. He finds a carrot somewhere, he eats the carrot, he does the shoelace and unties it, and they want to hang themselves. They're just gossiping about the most trivial, unimportant things in life. And then at the end, a boy comes, a messenger says, oh, sorry, Godot is not coming today. Godot is going to come next day, tomorrow. They say, okay, let's go. They don't move, the curtains are closed. The second act, same people again, and they speak about, like we realize that there's trouble with their memories in a way or another. They can't remember basically everything, and we don't know whether this is the second day or like 50 years or 30 or 10 years, basically like a couple of months or years later on, and then they're still also waiting for Godot. We have new extra characters, also minor characters, but basically at the end, the boy shows up, the messenger shows up, and he says, Mr. Godot told me to tell you he won't come this evening, but surely tomorrow. And again, they say, okay, let's go. And they don't move. The curtains are closed again.
What is the
So un-Shakespearean, right? What is it? What is the theme? Yeah. What is it about? Many people were like, come on, this is absurd. Ridiculous. And it was named, this type of theater was named Theater of the Absurd, Masrah al-Abath. Some people consider it,
It has no goal.
yeah? absurd, ridiculous, but some people believe that this is the most significant drama after Shakespeare. Because this is a modernist literature. Like how Ulysses is a significant work, like how T.S. Eliot's poem is different and significant. The text could be about nothing, but because, yeah,
It symbolizes
our life, we wait.
we always wait for something.
Look at us Palestinians here. We've been waiting for freedom, independence. We've been waiting for Israel to understand that we need our rights, human rights, basic human rights. We're waiting for the electricity to come. 4 hours a day of electricity is so unfair. We're waiting for the siege to be lifted. We're waiting for the occupation to end. We're waiting for the Rafah crossing to open, to travel, to finish. We spend all our lives waiting. We're waiting for the good things to come, for hope, for a better life. But nothing is improving. So what are we waiting for? We're waiting for Godot. You could write an article like, Palestinians are waiting for Godot. Are Palestinians waiting for Godot? Meaning like we have no hope. So in a way, this is how in the 20th century, if the Victorian age, some people had a tiny little shred of hope, here there's nothing. Godot doesn't even come to tell them, I'm sorry, I don't have time. Maybe tomorrow. He sends a little boy, oh, sorry, he's not coming, maybe surely tomorrow. And he never keeps his promise. So this is about the loss of faith, the loss of hope, the loss of even the sense of direction, the sense of purpose. Why are we here? It's about the very existence of us, of humanity.
He didn't have anyone else to be in.
Maybe, yeah. He has other crazy plays, like one of his plays, I guess, as far as I can remember, the main characters, there are 4 characters, all dead, all in the grave, and they're just chatting. Just what? Like, and many other plays. But again, remember this. The fact that this is different from Shakespeare and other playwrights doesn't mean this is bad literature. Many people love this experimental literature. I know many people like movies with, clear plot, the beginning and the middle and ending, and it ends happily and you love the movie. But many people love movies and texts that shake us, texts that make us ask questions and ask questions about ourselves, about life. What are we doing here? What's going on? So this is another example from 20th century literature. Waiting for Godot. Hopefully, whatever Godot is, he will show up. So this is basically the 3 texts for 20th century literature examples. I'll give you an idea about Virginia Woolf as a feminist writer and critic, and I'll give you an idea about our friend and fellow Palestinian, our cousin and our neighbor, the one and only Palestinian Christian intellectual and critic, Edward Said, in Orientalism. We should be proud that Edward Said is Palestinian, by the way. He's famous all over the world. So, now Virginia Woolf is a feminist, one of the early 20th century feminists. She lived, I think, until the 1950, 40, 7, 8, something, I don't care. But she was one of the leaders of the feminist movement who called for the human, for not only human, but political, intellectual, and all rights for women. That women, she said women are even better than men in many ways. Why? Because if everything, all the odds are against you, your parents are against you, your brothers are against you, your society is against you, everything is against you. If you manage, despite all these difficulties, to write, to produce, to do something, then you are amazing. Because everything is against you, like us here, Palestinians. Israel doesn't want us to do anything, to study, to grow, to build, to invest, right? So when you manage to succeed and become a success story, that's an amazing thing. Because people around the world don't have, have so many things. We don't have 1% of what they have. So in her famous article, a collection of articles called A Room of One's Own, she basically discusses not only literary figures like Afra Ben and George Eliot and other women writers. She also discusses fictional women, like how women were portrayed, for example, Chaucer, Shakespeare, and later on. So the idea is that you can't separate fact from fiction. Because literature also empowers us. I said this before. When you read a text about a particular person who struggles in a particular way, it influences you. It shows you an example. It tells you how to do it in your own way. So basically, she explores both women as writers and characters. The most interesting thing is that she discusses this idea. Many people, many male critics, many men generally would believe that it would have been impossible for any woman to have written the plays that Shakespeare wrote. Impossible. Why? For men, they would be saying because they are women. Because women can't write, can't express, can't explore what Shakespeare and other men poets or writers can explore. That's simple. And this is anti-feminist. Okay? Now, Virginia Woolf says, yeah, okay, I agree. Yes. It would have been impossible completely and entirely for any woman to have written the plays of Shakespeare in the age of Shakespeare, and she gives us reasons why. She imagines a sister for Shakespeare, and she gives him the name of Judith. So Judith is Shakespeare's fictional sister, invented by Virginia Woolf. Does he have a sister?
No.
So why does she invent her, create her? He doesn't have a sister. But she says, okay, let's assume that Shakespeare had a sister. She was as genius as Shakespeare, as smart as Shakespeare, as interested in art and literature and writing and studying and reading as Shakespeare. Let's take the journey together and see what her father would do to her, what her mother would do to her, what the society would do to her. So if she fails, it's not because she didn't even try or wasn't good or wasn't as smart as intellectual as. It's because the society was doing her. Someone read here. Okay, raise your voice, please.
Meanwhile, his extraordinarily gifted sister, let us suppose, remained at home. She was as adventurous, as imaginative as a Gaul, to see the world as he was. But she was not sent to school.
Shakespeare goes to school. She doesn't.
She had no chance of learning grammar and logic.
So he went to grammar school, learned logic. She doesn't.
Let alone of reading
Horace and Virgil.
She picked
Okay, but Shakespeare, you know how boys are generally careless and they toss their books around here. So she finds a book by Shakespeare, leaving it alone to the dust and to study the night before the exam. So she's like, oh, maybe I can. I don't have to go to school. I can learn by myself. And then the mother is like, go make sandwiches, go clean the dishes or something.
She picked up a book now and then, one of her brothers perhaps, and read a few pages. But then her parents came in and told her to mend the stockings or mind the stew and not moon about with the books.
You don't say anything. Don't mention books. This is not for you. Women are supposed to help around at the house, to get married, have kids, spend their time at home, taking care of the husband and the kids and making food. And that's it. This is the mentality. So, again, more extracts here. So she, here referring to Judith, the fictional character, fictional sister of Shakespeare, invented by Virginia Woolf. So even if she, and then later on, what happens? She is forced, Shakespeare, because he's the boy, he gets married, but he leaves and goes to London to pursue his dreams. She's forced into a marriage that she doesn't like. And she's beaten. And then her father begs her, tells her, if you don't get married to this man I picked for you, you're going to hurt me because I already said yes to the family or to the father or to the person himself. So this is what would happen. So if she runs away, she imagines that, okay, she runs away, she leaves the country, she would stand, for example, at the door of the stage, telling people, I can perform, I am an actress, I have a talent, I can act. Again, the men would be laughing at her and would be like, oh, women acting, no woman, he said, could possibly be an actress. It's impossible. We've never seen a woman, not because women didn't want to, but because they weren't allowed. And again, at the end of the day, she would find herself raped, maybe tricked, pregnant with a baby, with a child, and then dies somewhere in London. And this is how it ends for a woman. So basically she says, yeah, okay, women can't write like Shakespeare. But not because, and you know what she says? Very simple. She says, that's the title of the article, A Room of One's Own. She says a woman has to have financial independence. If you have your own house or your own room, you can be independent, you can express yourself, you can write. But as long as you're living in a house that nobody respects you or your privacy, you will not be able to. In the other class, I told the students, at least if you have so many family members here in Gaza, like houses would be having 10 and 12 brothers and sisters. At least have your own drawer where you keep your own talent, your own productions, if you write poetry, if you draw. And it's very easy because of social media. Now you have your own account. You can use a pen name, a pseudonym. You can have your own Facebook page under a pen name where you can write, whether in English or in Arabic. Now, remember, she praises John Donne, and she also praises Afra Ben, considers her to be one of the leaders, one of the pioneers. She started this. She showed the women how to speak their minds. That's why all women altogether ought to let flowers fall upon the grave of Afra Ben. She started this in a way or another. Finally, Edward Said and Orientalism. This is his book, Orientalism. It's, Orientalism? How does translate into Arabic, Orientalism? The Orient is the East. Sharq, Orientalism, al-istishraq. Generally, what Western people, the studies they involved in order to understand the East. It's called Orientalism, al-istishraq. So he again exposes how the West controls the East, abuses, exploits the East, and how the West always misinterprets the East. How generally, especially Europe, for example, looks down upon the natives, occupies them, controls them, abuses them, steals their raw materials, their resources, and then they leave us with nothing. And they, the divide and rule principle, divide and rule. So even when England, the British Empire withdraws, we are fighting among ourselves because of the division it created. So according to the Said, Orientalism is part of imperialism and colonialism. He says, English and Western literature, in a way, helped prepare the minds of the Western people to invade the world, colonize the world, and occupy the world. We've seen this in Shakespeare. We've seen this in Robinson Crusoe, for example. He says this famous quote from Edward Said, the beginning of Orientalism. The Orient, the East, us, has helped define Europe or the West. That's good, right? But not in its good sense here, as its contrasting image. So if the West is superior, the East is inferior. Civilized, uncivilized. Developed, backward. Scientific, sentimental and emotional. Scientific, intellectual, superstitious. So the East has always been looked at as the contrasting image. We are always the negative opposite, the other side of the coin. So what does Edward Said say? Edward Said brings the text and he tries to examine the relationship between the East and the West. Like we said this in the Tempest, remember? In Othello. In Othello, for example, Edward Said would say that basically there's a lot of racism here. Basically because the European white Christian people there are racist. They consider themselves to be more superior to Othello, not because they are smarter or better or more powerful, but because he's black, because he's originally an African and Muslim and Arab. And that's racism. So he tries to understand this unique relationship. Friday and Robinson Crusoe, the relationship. Why is Friday always there to be cured, to be civilized, misrepresented to us? Because of his origin and his color. He will never, no matter what happens, be considered to be a smart person compared to the Europeans. So this is an example from the book Kipling, Kim. In the book, the last example, just 1 minute, I want you all to go to page 154. This is an example of how Edward Said would be, for example, studying this text. Kipling is an English novelist, Victorian novelist, and 20th century novelist. He wrote this text. The text is called Kim. It's a novel. According to Edward Said, Kim is an imperialist novel, a colonialist novel. When I say, remember when I said an allegory of imperialism? In a way, basically, it shows the West that they are better, superior, more civilized. And the East is the very contrasting image. So this is Orientalism. This is Edward Said's theory of post-colonialism, to study the colonial interaction between the colonized and the colonizers. Now in this book, sadly, I love this book. I said this many times. But this is an example of the worst whitewashing I have read in my life. Number one, the book says Kipling shows in Kim that he's sympathetic with the Indians. The story is about an English boy who grows up in India, and who works for the Secret Service, for the British Secret Service, to gather information and intelligence to help empower the British Empire. That's basically. So here he says, Kipling shows that he has sympathy to whom? To the Indian people. Okay, this is an opinion, I understand. But then the text quotes this, Kipling saying, not from the book, from a poem, the East is the East and the West is the West, and never the two or the twain shall meet. And I think this is racism. He's saying the East is the East, the West is the West. They will never meet. Because the East is the East, and because the West is the West. Because the East is civilization, modernity, what else? Superior, smart, intellectual, scientific, all the technological and industrial advancement. And the East is what?
Corruption.
Backward, uncivilized, savages in a way or another. So the book comments here, and this is infuriating. I'm sure Edward Said is pulling his hair right now. I'm sure he's spinning and fretting in his grave because of this explanation. So the book says, the British Empire had tried to make them meet, to make them East and West, and become part of one whole. But in the new century, a new process started and things began to fall to pieces. What? Are you describing hundreds of years of slavery, of colonialism, of occupation, of massacres, of ethnic cleansing, of pogroms? You're describing this as England trying to make the East and the West meet? This is horrible. I'm sure, again, Edward Said is pulling his hair.
They use this.
This is whitewashing. This is in the book. Yeah, it says here in the book that the British Empire tried to bring India and Africa and Europe together. This is not true. The British Empire is about occupation and imperialism. It's about control. It's about supremacy. And it describes here the new process. This is the movements of liberation and independence. This is fighting back. This is the natives trying to end the oppression. But it's described as something like a process. And began to fall. What began to fall into pieces? Oppression, imperialism, colonialism, injustice.
Do you mean that they used this line to show that they were great and they wanted to?
Yeah, the book here interprets, like, comments on Kipling's line that the East is the East and the West is the West and they will never meet again, saying that the British Empire tried to make the East and the West meet. They didn't. They went for control. They went for control, to assume everything as theirs. And this is an example of how a critic like Edward Said is inviting us to reread literature. And Virginia Woolf inviting us to reread literature in a particular way. I'll stop here. Thank you very much. We have one more class, and then we will do a review class on Wednesday. Okay? Thank you very much.